A very good morning to all of you. Welcome back to the channel. So let's start with today's analysis for 11th of July 2023. So as we see that rain, they continues to pound North India and 25 people have lost their lives. So 300 people, including tourists, stranded in Lahore, Spiti and Kullu districts of Himachal Pradesh. So situation is very critical in these two areas. And apart from this, the topic of disaster management from GS3 that becomes important. Yesterday also I mentioned about this that what kind of different plan we need to have for hilly regions, for the plain regions, specifically in the context of when we have flash floods, how do we need to manage things at ground level? So in Himachal Pradesh, we are seeing a situation of flash floods. You can see this picture also. So extensive damage to highways, power stations, water supply systems has been caused. And even Prime Minister is being talked to the Chief Minister of Himachal Pradesh. So that's the important thing. Then Foxconn pulls out of the $19.5 billion chip joint pact with Vedanta. So we are focusing upon the domestic production, the development of manufacturing capacities for the semiconductor chips. And we have discussed this topic also in detail, that how it is geostrategically important. And basically right now China enjoys a dominance in this particular sector. So that is also one of the reasons or one of the things that we are focusing upon in order to diversify the global supply chain in terms of the semiconductor chips. So that's there. And obviously you might be knowing about the recent initiative with US, that is between India and US over the same thing. Then talking about the important raw materials, a day or before we discussed in detail about this topic about gallium and lithium. So that was in the context of even the batteries for the electric vehicles as well. So Supreme Court seeks data on action taken against the lynchings. So Supreme Court on Monday, it decided to take stock of the what union and the state governments have done so far to punish lynchings, mostly which are spurred by the communal hate. So here hate speech and communal hatred, that topic is important. Public order, law and order, all of that is very important. So basically you need to know about if we have any particular law, any particular provisions regarding hate speech, what has been Supreme Court judgments, or what does Supreme Court it says about this thing. So recently it is also taking the stock of the same thing. It is asked for data on what actions has been taken by the government over such incidences. So the you can only also you can call these acts to be the horrendous acts of mobocracy. So this requires a special law and punishment. So court said that the Home Ministry could meet with the department heads concerned with the states and provide the status on measures taken by them to comply with the directions of the court in its 2018 judgment. So here one case has been mentioned. So it has directed states to form special task forces to collect the intelligence on likely incidences of hate speeches, mob violence, and lynchings. So these are the keywords. So Madras High Court to quash the criminal cases against the minor boys for consensual relationships with minor girls. So cases they will be quashed if the court finds that they harm the interest and future of the children involved. And judges they also order an end to the two-finger test of the sexual assault victims and the archaic procedure to test potency through the sperm collection. So obviously here the dignity of women that becomes important, and apart from this the ground behind the pausing of the case by the High Court is that if it finds that there's a possibility that the future or the interest of the children that gets harmed if the cases are not dropped, so that is another angle which the court is talking about. And then when we talk about the act, the POXO Act is there, which is the Protection of Children from the Sexual Assaults or the Sexual Offences Act of 2012. Then we have the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection Children Care Act of 2015. So you need to know about different and the important provisions of these two acts. Then habeas corpus, this is a writ. So again, you need to know about now all the writ petitions that can be filed, the different features and their importance. Coming to the editorial page, so artificial intelligence, disruptive economic impact, and we need an India check. So basically, this article is focusing upon the situation in India as far as the impact of artificial intelligence and its usage is concerned so far. So little did we know that beyond the automated factory machines, self-driving cars, and robocops, artificial intelligence, it would one day crash into our lives, authoring poems, tipping us with pickup lines, and passing the toughest examinations. So the recent rise of the large language models, this is a keyword, and generative AI. It has sparked more interest in the progress of AI across the globe, and ChatGPT, it was running with its servers crammed for months, and Twitter feeds, they were filled with quirky ChatGPT codes, followed by the threads shedding light on the versatile application of such chatbots. So recently, yesterday only, we talked about this app that has been released by Meta. So positive effects of AI adoption. So there's a broad consensus on increasing productivity by adopting AI in producing the goods and services. And definitely it is also going to play an important part in designing as well. So first benefit of AI is that it would be increasing the productivity. So there's like the substantiation has been mentioned over here. You can go through it. Apart from this, so it is basically helping the companies, the MNCs, factories to function more faster, smarter, and being more productive. And apart from this, research from across the world is also largely optimistic about the AI's impact on growth as well. So it is going to aid growth. That's another impact. And it's predicted that an increase in global GDP by 14% by 2030 due to the ongoing technological advancements in AI. So report, it has also highlighted the generative AI's potential to create human-like output, and that its ability to break down the communication barriers between the humans and machines could have large positive macroeconomic effects. So with artificial intelligence becoming an integral part of the global economy, India should focus on education and training in this technology rather than its regulation. So regulation should also be a part of it, and we should also focus upon skilling the labor force around AI. Then employment that may be adversely affected because of AI adoption. So experts, they also point to the multiple negative impacts of this technology. So first is the labor replacement that AI technologies bring to the table. And AI, it can automate the repetitive tasks, and with the generative AI, even creative tasks, they can be done efficiently and fastly. So this is one basically concern around this behind adoption of this technology. And apart from that, the adverse effects primarily, they affect the blue collar workers and individuals with lower levels of education. So they are basically at risk. And apart from this, talking about what are the opportunities for India now. So India being the most populous country, it should be on the lookout, as any negative effect on employment can adversely impact the economy. So basically, we need to balance between these two things. We also need to ensure that we are, effectively, we are putting it to the use, and then at the same time we need to ensure that it is not a risk to the employment. So increased efficiency by the adoption of AI in call centers and software industries does not bode well for millions of Indians who work in this field, because India is the most populous country, and then we also talk about the demographic dividend. So how basically we can balance between all these factors is a very important area. So regulation on its use, it is not a bright solution, as this would just drive investments and new opportunities away. So that is also to be kept in mind. Then as per a report, it suggests that the greatest economic gains from AI will come from China, with a projected 26% boost to its GDP by 2030. So it would be prudent for India to focus on education and training in AI. And this could be a lot easier now with the online education having larger acceptance after the COVID-19 pandemic. So that can be utilized and leveraged. And see, here it is mentioned about demographic dividend and new opportunities that emanate from AI. So it has seeped into every aspect of the global economy, and its effects on the productivity and growth, it is being seen in an optimistic way. However, its use needs to be regulated, and governments, they would have to set up their cyber regulations also with respect to the new challenges that are posed by AI. And many also need tax capital, as suggested by many experts, to balance the returns from the capital and labor to reduce the displacement and distributional effects. So it's a reality, and we need to accept it accordingly. And obviously, every country is putting it to their best use. And no an apocalypse where robots take over the human world is nowhere soon. So that is one debate. Basically, we have discussed this topic before as well, but this was much more, we can say, a little simpler. So you can take away the important points from this article. Moving forward, women's reproductive autonomy as the new catchword. So the theme of this year is World Population Day, that is unleashing the power of gender equality, uplifting the voices of women and girls to unlock our world's infinite possibilities, could not be more apt for India. So when we unlock the full potential of women and girls, encouraging and nurturing their desires for families and themselves, we galvanize half the leadership, ideas, innovation, and creativity available to societies. So basically, this topic is very, very important, because these days we also talk about the women-led development. So that is also one of the focus areas. So this becomes an important topic. So in India, which is the world's most populous nation, template for the women-led development, be it in science, technology, we talk about the STEM sector, must also include the reproductive autonomy at its core. So we need not miss on this thing, as it is being mentioned, the reproductive autonomy of females. So for far too long, the world, it has been obsessed with the population numbers and targets instead of, ensuring reproductive autonomy for each woman. We are obsessed with the total fertility rates, how that is basically how the trend is changing, instead of ensuring that family planning services reach all those who want it. And we are then obsessed with what the ideal population size of family should be, a community and a country, and even the world it ought to be. So it is important to understand that there are no ideal numbers or figures when you talk about. You can't, basically come to an exact figure when you talk about what needs to be an ideal population size of family or of a country. So population stability, it comes when the reproductive and the sexual health decisions, they are free of discrimination, coercion, and violence, and that reproductive and sexual health services, they are affordable, acceptable, accessible, and of high quality, and that women and couples, they are supported to have the number of children they want when they want them. So this is basically the reproductive autonomy, which this article is talking about. And you can take away these keywords. These are like all the very common, but you can cite them in your answers wherever they're apt. So India deserves to be commended for its family planning initiatives, where despite the many challenges, the aim is to provide an increasingly comprehensive package of reproductive health services to every potential beneficiary. That's there, and India's commitment towards the Family Planning 2030 partnership includes expanding its contraceptive basket as well. So, inclusion of the new contraceptive options advances women's rights and autonomy, leading to a spike in the modern contraceptive prevalence. Access to timely, quality, affordable family planning services that is crucial because unspaced pregnancies they may have a detrimental influence on the newborn's health as well as major effects on the maternal mortality, morbidity, and healthcare expenditure also. So Indian government's health, population, and development programs, they have shown steady progress over the years. Life expectancy at birth, it has significantly increased in the country. And when we have a look at the figures, so in the 1990s, Indians, they are currently living a decade longer. So almost this has improved with by 10 years. And in terms of the maternal health, India it has had it has made impressive strides even in terms of improvement that we have seen in the maternal health numbers. So the current rate of maternal mortality is 97 per 1 lakh live births in a year, which is down from 254, which was there in 2004. So this is another improvement that we have seen. Another triumph of these programs is a gender empowerment. So since the beginning of 2000, India, it has cut the number of child marriages by half. Teen pregnancies too, they have dramatically decreased, and access to the vital services, including health, education, nutrition, that is also improved. So when we talk about advancing the gender equality, it is not just about women, but also about the populations as a whole. So in in aging societies that worry about the labor productivity, achieving gender parity in workforce is the most effective way to improve the output and the income growth. So in countries which are experiencing rapid population growth, women's empowerment through education and family planning, it can bring enormous benefits by way of human capital and inclusive economic development. This is a very important statement. Then India, it has a significant opportunity to advance the gender equality and grow its economy. So in fact, the raising the women's labor force participation rate by 10 percentage points might account for more than 70% of the potential GDP growth opportunity for India. So that is basically the potential that lies in. And we also need then the investments in required areas. So the part to such a bright future, that's very clear, focusing on gender equality centered growth. So this is one of the keywords, gender equality centered growth, rights and choices, promises to help all achieve their aspirations. So it can be ensured by making investments in women's life at every stage from childbirth to adolescence to maturity, engaging with women, girls, and other marginalized people, and formulating legislation and policies to empower them. So World Population Day this year, it's an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to putting individuals' rights, particularly women's rights and well-being, at the center. So gender just approaches and solutions are the fundamental building blocks of a more prosperous India and indeed the world. So there are a lot of keywords in this article. You can just note them down at one place if you're making some notes. Moving forward. So the global south, how this thing it originated and what is the significance of it. So the term global south, it is not geographical, rather its usage denotes a mix of political, geopolitical, and economic commonalities between the nations. And this can also be one of the very nice introductions in your answers, which is when basically there's any question around global south, that it is not geographical, it denotes a mix of the political, geopolitical, and economic commonalities between the nations which are a part of global south. So here, let's see, going beyond the third world. So the term global south, it appears to have been first used in 1969 by the political activist Karl, and writing in the liberal Catholic magazine here, everything is mentioned. But it was only after 1991 break of the Soviet Union, which marked the end of the so-called Second World, that the term it gained momentum. And until then, the more common term for the developing nations, countries that had yet to industrialize fully, then we used to use the term third world for them. So the term, it was coined by Alfred Sauvé in 1952 in an analogy with the France's historical three states. So that's there. So first world, when we use this term, we are talking about, we are referring to the advanced capitalist nations. Second world is the socialist nations, which is led by the Soviet Union. And third world is to developing nations, many at the time still under the colonial yoke. So that was the terminology. When after 1991, when we saw the Soviet Union breakup, then we saw basically the term South, Global South gaining momentum. So the fall of the Soviet Union and this gave a convenient pretext for the term third world to disappear as well. So usage of the term, it fell rapidly in 1990s. So meanwhile, developed, developing, underdeveloped, that also faced criticism for holding up the Western countries as the ideal while portraying those outside that club as backwards. So this was the understanding. So geopolitical, and it is not a geographical term. So it is not geographical. In fact, the global south's two largest countries, which is China and India, they lie entirely in the northern hemisphere. So even they are a part of global south, but as we say that this term, it does not connote a geographical meaning. So that's clear. So rather its usage, it denotes a mix of political, geopolitical, economic commonalities between the nations that exist. So countries in the global south, they were mostly at the receiving end of the imperialism and the colonial rule, with the African countries as perhaps the most visible example of this. So this is one thing or one criteria, and it gives them a very different outlook on what dependency theorists they have described as a relationship between the center and periphery in the world political economy, or to put it in simple words, the relationship between the West and the rest. So given the imbalanced past relationship between many of the countries of the global south and the global north, both during the age of empire and in the Cold War, it's little wonder that today many opt not to be aligned with any one great power. And whereas the terms like third world and underdeveloped, they convey images of economic powerlessness, that isn't true of the global south. So that's also an important thing. So by 2030, it is projected that 3 of the 4 largest economies will be from global south. So with the order being China, India, US, and Indonesia. So already the GDP in terms of the purchasing power of the global south, it dominated BRICS nations, and that surpasses that of the global north's G7 club also. And there are now more billionaires in Beijing than in New York City. So global south on the march, this economic shift, it has gone hand in hand with the enhanced political visibility as well. So countries in the global south, they're increasingly asserting themselves on the global scene, be it China brokering of the Iran and Saudi Arabia's rapprochement, or Brazil's attempt to push a peace plan to end the war in Ukraine. So this shift in economic and political power, it has led experts in geopolitics to write about the coming of an Asian century. So the global south is flexing political and economic muscles that the developing countries in the third world never had. So that's the idea about it. So what were the events which led to the riots in France? We're not going to the details, we'll just go through the gist. So here we see that in France on June 27, Nahil, he was a 17-year-old unarmed French citizen of Algerian and Moroccan descent, was fatally shot by the police after being stopped for a traffic violation. And that was in a western suburb of Paris. So this incident, it has brought to the fore the extent of racial polarization in France, and not just in France, but we are seeing that such incidences or such violent acts, they are increasing in other countries of the Western world also. So racial polarization, racial discrimination is on the rise. So recent studies, they have highlighted the disproportionate targeting of individuals who are perceived as Black or Arab by the police during identity checks. So President Macron faces challenge on multiple fronts, including the protests over the pension reforms. Then another is domestic discontent over the inflation and the ongoing riots because of the racial discrimination. So there's a need for strengthening the palliative care in the face of non-communicable diseases. So the revised operational guidelines of the National Program for Prevention and Control of the Non-Communicable Diseases, it limit the palliative care to not only the basically to only cancer patients, leaving out those with any other chronic and debilitating ailments. So India is home to nearly 20% of the world's population, two-thirds of which reside in the rural areas. So apart from a rising population, India has experienced a steep rise in the burden of lifestyle-related non-communicable diseases. So nearly we see 1.4 million people that are diagnosed with cancer in India every year, while diabetes, hypertension, respiratory diseases, they are also on the rise. So these are a few examples, and all these diseases, they need palliative care sooner or later in the disease trajectory. So what do we mean by palliative care? So it is a branch of medicine focusing on improving the quality of life and preventing suffering among those with life-limiting illnesses. So it aims to identify the patients who are at risk of over-medicalization at the expense of quality of life and the financial burden on the family. So basically, it is a part of the preventive health care. So it's often misinterpreted as the end of life care. No, however, it aims to improve the quality of life by addressing the physical, psychological, spiritual, and social domains of the health of the people who are suffering from the life-limiting diseases, like it can be heart failure, kidney failure, certain neurological diseases, and cancer. So how many need palliative care? So obviously the number is very large. Not going to the details, you can just go through it here. The data has been mentioned. So post-independence, we can see that India has made considerable efforts to improve the health of its people. A three-tier health system, multiple national health programs and schemes, and Ayushman Bharat health insurance scheme, all are positive steps taken towards the universal health coverage. So despite these efforts, we see 55 million people in India, they're pushed below the poverty line every year due to the health-related expenditures. So you can note this down. This is an important part of the data. So over medicalization, it plays a significant role in this financial burden. So is there a palliative care program in India or not? So the National Program for Prevention, Control of Cancer, Diabetes, Cardiovascular Diseases, and Stroke, it is now the National Program for Prevention and Control of the Non-Communicable Diseases. It includes the chronic diseases whose treatment contributes the most to health-related expenses. So we have a dedicated program for this. So it was launched in 2010 to counter the rising burden of non-communicable diseases in the country. But since it was launched in 2010 and now obviously situation has changed massively, the types of diseases which are we are seeing are on a rise, that has changed. So obviously basically guidelines or however the plan we have, that also needs to be shaped accordingly. So the program, it envisages the provision of promotive, preventive, and curative care from the primary to the tertiary institutes, providing health services delivery across the continuum of care, and the gaps exist in the guidelines. So that's what they need to be in consonance with the current situation, the current times. So as per the Global Atlas, the palliative care 2020, the need for the palliative care was higher for the non-cancer illnesses. So that's there. And so basically, home-based care, it forms the ideal mode of healthcare delivery in terms of palliative care. So the program previously, its guidelines, they mentioned support being provided to facilitate home-based palliative care services. However, the palliative care services delivery starts only from the district hospital in the revised guidelines with no mention of the home-based care. So this thing is lacking in guidelines, and it must be delivered at least at the health and wellness centers and sub-center level as well. So guidelines also mention the linking of 11 programs to promote the convergence of the services focusing on the care of the non-communicable diseases. So one of these is a national program for palliative care, and it was announced in 2012. However, the lack of a dedicated budget, it has prevented the implementation of the program since its inception. So that's another area, like merely launching a program is not going to solve things. We need to ensure its effective implementation ground as well. So theoretically, the linkage could improve the provision of the palliative care, but the mechanisms of the linkage, that too with the program that has not yet been fully implemented, that is unclear. So is palliative care accessible or not? So here, despite various government programs with palliative care provisions, they are one of their objectives, like the National Program for the Healthcare of Elderly, then access to palliative care, it continues to be abysmal. So basically, the ground reality is not as what we want it to be. Basically, what are the objectives of these national programs that have been launched previously, but they've not been effectively implemented. So that remains a challenge, or we see a gap there. So NGOs like Pallium India and Can Support, they are trying to fill this gap, but according to Dr. Matthew, this isn't enough. So only NGOs coming to the forefront is not going to fill this gap completely. So NGOs, they have limitations on how much they can spend, and that does not compare in any way with how much the government can spend. So guidelines have also skipped an opportunity to bring focus on children suffering from the chronic diseases. So even there, we are seeing the number rising up. So an estimated 98% of the children facing moderate to severe suffering during their end of life reside in lower and middle income countries like India. So basically in today's times, we're seeing how our lifestyle has changed. So definitely children also become an important thing. So how is such access measured? So guidelines, they narrow focus is also evident from the indicator chosen to assess the program's impact. So that's there. So dilution of Article 370 led to unprecedented era of peace in Jammu and Kashmir. This has been informed by Center to the Supreme Court. So Union Home Ministry says that life has returned to normalcy in the region after over 3 decades of turmoil. So ministry also said that street violence, which was engineered by the terrorist and secessionist networks, it had become a thing of the past. So organized stone throwing incidents, which were linked to the terrorist separatist agenda, it had come down from 1700 to zero. Bandh and Hartals, they had also become a distant memory. Resolute anti-terror actions that has dismantled the terror ecosystem, which led to a significant drop in terror recruitment. So government said that it has encouraged policies to mainstream the youth to wean them away from militancy. So government is focusing upon the all-round development of Jammu and Kashmir. The Supreme Court has issued notice to center on the Delhi Ordinance and it implicates LG in this case. So we have gone through all the nuances of this issue as well. So it's a repeat. Basically, this is just merely an update that Supreme Court has issued a notice on this thing. So China, it protests Dalai Lama's meeting the US officials in Delhi and calls it to be an interference. So even this has been a long pending thing that, well, this is the stance of China on this, and again, this is a reiteration of the same thing. It was visible in the past as well. So China, it protested the meeting between the Dalai Lama and the officials of the Central Tibetan Administration with visiting the US officials and calling it an attempt to interfere in the China's internal affairs. So this is what China believes in. The Dalai Lama, who arrived in Delhi, said that Tibetans, they do not seek independence, and he was open for talks with the Chinese government, which he said had sent feelers to him. So alternatives to urea, import of urea, you need to know about this trend. So basically, right now, here the Union Minister, for chemicals and fertilizers says that import of urea, it may ease, basically it may reduce by 2025, and alternative forms will replace urea. So reducing the usage of chemical fertilizers is an important thing, and the balance of the soil, it has been damaged, and production, it has become saturated as a result of this. So soil health, human health, animal health, and environmental health, they are connected with one another. And to promote one health package, we brought the scheme. So basically the scheme is that the special package estimated at rupees 3.7 lakh crores for the farmers have to be brought in as the use of the fertilizers. It has become unbalanced in the country. So the ratio of the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, it should be 4:2:1. Instead, it is at right now, it is at 8:3:1 in the country. So this is basically clearly pointing towards the overusage of the chemical fertilizers. So awareness, it has to be built among the farmers about the nano urea, and they will start using it. Farmers, they had not accepted the chemical fertilizers too very soon. So even nano urea, it was approved after all the scientific studies. So even there also we are seeing again some reluctance at the front of the farmers, and that's there. Then you can also basically talk about the subsidies that is provided by the government, which ultimately, which is also one of the factors which leads to overusage of the chemical fertilizers. Coming to the world page, so let's see what the important topics. So you can locate Canary Islands on the map. Apart from this, the Threads app, yesterday we talked about it, that it's going to be basically functioning in the context, or it is somewhere connected to Instagram. So Twitter rival Threads, it surpasses 100 million users in less than 5 days. So Solomon Islands in China, they signed deals on police, economy, and technology. So again, you can locate Solomon Islands on maps. So under the Prime Minister Manisa, Solomon Islands had switched to recognition from Taiwan to Beijing. So basically, they're cooperating together. And so the Solomon Islands, 2,000 kilometers northeast of Australia, has been China's biggest success in a campaign to expand its presence in the South Pacific. So that is another emerging area where China is targeting to basically again overpower the countries. And Solomon Islands, they've signed a secretive security agreement with Beijing that might have allowed Chinese military forces in the South Pacific as well. So that's there. Coming to the business page, FBI is not having to disclose the final owner is challenged in Adani Hindenburg case, according to SEBI. So when we talk about the foreign portfolio investors, obviously this is one of the reasons why basically people choose to invest through FAs, that they don't have to disclose their final owner. Their identity remains autonomous. So essential challenge to probe, it did not emanate from the repeal of the provisions from the FBI regulations of 2019, and this the markets regulator tells the Supreme Court. So question of the final ownership comes into the forefront. So Justice A.M. Sapre panel had said that SEBI drew a blank in its investigation into the Hindenburg's allegations on the Adani due to the changes made in 2018. So SEBI said the core problem was there had never been any requirement to disclose the last natural person above every person owing the economic interest in the FBI. So SEBI, it informed the Supreme Court that challenge to its inquiry into this Hindenburg case lay in the fact that requirement to disclose the last natural person or the ultimate owner of the FBI remains non-existent. So now we need to obviously take this thing into account, that given that there might be future repeat of such cases. So what changes can be made right now in order to ensure that such challenge does not arise in future? So net direct tax collections rises 16%. So here you need to know actually the proper chronology. of the tax revenues collected through the direct tax sources, indirect taxes, and how GST and the corporate tax and income tax, all of their proper chronology needs to be known. Coming to the Mint newspaper, so WHO red flag. So should India limit the junk food ads or not? So WHO has recommended mandatory restrictions on marketing the junk food to children, terming it a harmful practice. Given how our lifestyle is changing, we are so much dependent upon, just opening up Zomato and ordering food anytime and whatever we want. So basically, we need to regulate first and see where are we actually going. So what do the WHO guidelines say? So here, according to WHO, the food environment, which includes marketing, it's a key influencer of the dietary choices that people make. So targeting children with ads influences their view of nutrition and consumption. So such marketing practices, it violates the International Convention on Child Rights, including the right to health and freedom from exploitation. So that's why WHO, it has asked the countries to consider mandatory curbs on marketing of the food high in the saturated and trans fats, sugar, and salt to protect children of all ages. So countries, they can use a localized model diet to red flag certain foods and limit the power of advertising to persuade the kids. So what can countries do in this regard? So according to WHO, marketing restrictions, they can be tailored to a country's dietary customs, availability of the fresh produce and existing governance structures that exist. But committed political leadership and community support can come up against the industry interference and ambiguity around defining unhealthy food. So we need clarity about what actually is unhealthy food. So penalties for violations, they must be meaningful in nature. So how big is this problem in India? So India is battling an explosion in the lifestyle disorders. And we talked about how the non-communicable diseases, they are spreading. So as per a study, it shows that 1 in 4 adults they are either pre-diabetic or they are diabetic. So some 40% of the Indians, they have reported abdominal obesity, and other studies, they show growing incidence of the non-communicable diseases even in children. So most packaged and ultra processed food items like juice, biscuits, savories, they exceed the recommended level of sugar, salt, and fats. So it's imperative that marketing of the junk food is restricted like tobacco and liquor. So quote of the day is that this decision of the Foxconn to withdraw from its joint venture with Vedanta, it has no impact on India's semiconductor fab goals. So like there is no impact of this. So this is coming from the Union Minister of State for Electronics and IT. So this is the article that we started with today. Coming to the economy page. So let's see, improving the revenue collection to figure in the GST mode. So US weapons won't wean India off Russia because Russia has been in India's important defense partner. So since we are seeing our cooperation with China, with US, it's increasing. So it does not mean that if we are coming closer, we are making new deals with US, so we are going to leave behind China. That's not going to be the thing. So India's multi-billion-dollar purchases of the US arms are less about shifting its reliance on Russian defense equipment and moving towards the West, but it's more about developing its own domestic weapons industry. Security officials and analysts, they feel this way. So India is the world's biggest arms importer, but almost all of its major weapons purchases, they now include provisions for the joint manufacture of the technology transfer, irrespective of which country it is dealing with. So again, the main focus area is not leaving behind Russia or coming closer to US. It's about uh, basically strengthening our domestic capabilities. It's about the emerging critical technologies. It's about Atmanirbhar Bharat. It's about Make in India. So Russia's war in Ukraine, it has disrupted some military supplies to India. So reinforcing New Delhi's long-term desire to diversify imports or replace them with the home-built hardware is the thing that we are focusing upon. Coming to Financial Express newspaper. So this we've already covered about the Foxconn exit. Then SEBI defends the 2019 rule change. This is again in the context of the FPIs and their identity being autonomous. This is already discussed from the Hindu newspaper. So Supreme Court to hear the Hindenburg report on Adani case today, and SEBI says that 2019 change in the rules on how offshore funds they report their ownership did not make it tougher to identify their beneficiaries. So market regulator says that its rule changes in fact tightened the disclosure requirement related to the beneficial owners. So Supreme Court panel had said that rule change made it difficult in identifying the beneficiaries of the offshore funds. So basically, you can see both the things are contrasting. SEBI saying something else, Supreme Court panel is saying something else on this thing. So gas-based economy, when the country can import 86% of its oil requirement, it can better develop a gas-based economy. So that is one of the possible alternatives. And that is also one of the sustainable options as well. So natural gas is a cleaner fuel and LNG per billion BTU is cheaper than oil. So we can explore here. India likely to be the world's second largest economy by 2075, according to Goldman Sachs. So nominal GDP to be $52.5 trillion in a little over half a century. So GDP level projections in real. This is as per 2021. So here we have for different countries. Projections are till 2070. So here we starting with 1980. So India is, this orange color is for India. So you can imagine the curve, how sharply it is rising after, we can say, when we are nearing towards 2030. So how sharply it would be increasing up. So in this case, you need to identify what are the potential sectors which can expand massively or which holds the potential of such a massive GDP growth. Then like we have been around the same percentage since 1980, but in other countries you can see in case of US, you can see it has been like increasing gradually. In case of Europe, you can see some fluctuations and then it would be increasing smoothly, but that is not going to be so massive an increase compared to US or India or even China. You can see that from 2000, it has increased, started increasing up sharply. There were few disruptions because of COVID-19, and then again, its trajectory is also very sharply increasing upwards. So it would be at the top, followed by India, then US, then Euro, and then Japan. So India beats China as a top emerging market for investing. So you can see that is one of the signs, and India, it has overtaken China as the most attractive emerging market for investing, with India is increasingly viewed positively for its improved business and political stability, favorable demographics, regulatory initiatives, and a friendly environment for the sovereign investors. So these are the factors which are attracting the investors towards India. So storage infrastructure is a must for shift to the cleaner fuels. So board to take up the issue with the government. So India needs to create a storage for the natural gas to promote a robust gas market and to shift towards the cleaner fuel as per the Petroleum and the Natural Gas Regulatory Board. And the board is likely to take up this issue with the government. So regulators' comment comes at a time when the latest National Electricity Plan 2022 unveiled by the Central Electricity Authority signaled no additional gas-based power capacity. And also the high price of the domestic gas and imported LNG, it has apparently led to a slump in the demand for gas from several user industries of late. So that's one of the challenges. And for the market dynamics and supply assurance, for the consumer to shift to gas storage must be there. So basically, we have to work more upon the storage infrastructure. So natural gas share in India's energy mix stands at 6.2%, and the target of the natural gas share by 2030 is expected to rise to 15%. Taking up the Indian Express newspaper and important topics that we have not covered so far. So, Brij Bhushan molested, stalked, liable to be prosecuted and punished as per the Delhi police. So, repeated continuing harassment, sections 354, 354A, 354D have been invoked. So, charge sheet details accounts of 15 witnesses to corroborate allegations, and wrestlers they flagged same charges before the oversight panel, but no action was taken back then. SEBI says that tightened the FPI regulations, but tax havens they pose a global challenge. So SEBI it said that despite tightening of the norms to lift the wheel around the opaque structure of the FPIs in terms of basically their disclosure about their identities. So SEBI says that the tighter or the changed or the amended regulations, they have basically been made much more stricter in terms of easy disclosure of their identity or easy identification of the FPI investors. So regulator, it has faced a wall since entities, actually the controlling FPIs are in jurisdictions which leave ambiguity around the entities that have economic interest in the FPIs, but no ostensible control over them. So an expert committee appointed by the Supreme Court, it had said that difficulties are being experienced by SEBI in identifying the holders of the economic interest. And the expert committee, it was set up to investigate if there was violation of the minimum public shareholding norms and if there was a failure to disclose the transactions with related parties with respect to the allegations raised by the Hindenburg report. So after that, basically, this thing was highlighted. So concern over minors being booked under POCSO. So law panel is not for lowering the consent age. So why basically what is the worry around this? So minors aged between 16 to 18 who engage in consensual act that may come under the definition of the sexual activity under the law run the risk of being booked under POCSO. So while these cases of adolescent sex, they may not necessarily result in conviction of a minor boy, the law is such that it could result in denial of bail and prolonged detention. So we need to take into account other factors also which can have a negative impact on the mind of a children. So Supreme Court and several high courts, they have underlined the concerns over the criminalization of the adolescent sex. So the 22nd Law Commission of India, it is not in favor of lowering the age of consent for the minors. And commission, it is to release its report also on the minimum age of consent under the POCSO Act. And under the 2012 legislation, the minimum age of consent is 18 years. So it is also likely to recommend about the awareness measures on adolescent healthcare, including making sex education mandatory and teaching the basics of consent under the POCSO Act in the schools as well. So soon the emergency teams for accidents at the construction sites, like such types of case studies are there in GS4 ethics. So you can also cite this as like what steps are you going to take in order to ensure basically that there is fair investigation. So you can also mention about the emergency teams. So MOVE follows the death of two people in two separate incidents, and emergency team. So what would be their role that becomes important? So they would be submitting a preliminary report along with the geotagged photographs of the incidents, and that's there. So those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act, was said by Albert Einstein. So amid the downpour, after delayed onset monsoon, it has picked up, but worries about the skewed spatial distribution, dry spells, at that remains. So we need to take this thing also into account and need to plan things accordingly. So Southwest monsoon, it has recorded 52% rainfall deficiency during the first 2 weeks of the season that runs from June to September. But now it has made remarkable progress since then. And only Eastern India, Maharashtra, and South, barring Tamil Nadu, they remain in the red zone. Although the past 1 week and more, it has seen even many of these areas, they have received good showers. So this concern that we were having, that it might be, we might be having weak monsoon this time because of El Nino, but that concerns are addressed, well addressed. But now we are having the concern about how we are going to manage things in different terrains, how basically the disasters, possible disasters, they are going to be handled. So the Uniform Civil Code lessons from Goa, since Goa, it has already a working UCC, which is there in place. So uniformity, it can be unjust to women, and Uniform Civil Code, it can be but a mirage resulting from the spectacle created by the ruling dispensation. So provision of holding of the property by the couples as a unit may in fact militate against the female's spouse, who by and large end up contributing to the property of the male spouse in cash terms towards repairs or in kind towards maintenance, and therefore has a deserving claim to co-own the husband's properties, while the reverse may not be true. Also, such a provision unjustly empowers the male spouse to throw a spanner in the claims for the marital property, including residential property, upon divorce, by making corresponding claims to the parental property of his spouse. So that's there. And here it is like basically giving us the details of the lessons in points. So firstly, does a uniform portion of the family law have any discriminatory provisions or not? So management of the matrimonial property is the prerogative of the male spouse. So this we've already discussed. Second is the concept of the matrimonial property. It involves all the assets acquired through self-purchase or inheritance or any other manner before and during the subsistence of marriage by either of the couple. Third is a critical to the whole discussion is the issue of access to justice. So we have a pathetic scenario in Goa where even to this day there is limited scope for learning, teaching family laws of Goa in the curriculum for the legal education. And even if informed about the law, there's a need to handhold any woman and explain what are the provisions. So women, they need assistance to gather the details of the matrimonial property and income, which are generally not easily accessible to her, and due to which she is unable to make appropriate claims in terms of her entitlements. So this is another challenge. Fourthly is the uniform portion of the law itself provides for canonical marriages and civil marriages. Fifth is the code of customs and usages of the genital Hindus provides for the polygamy and adoption and the blatantly sexist conditions, and also for the Hindu undivided family that is to be governed, managed, and represented by the senior most male member. Sixth is to the extent that there are Positive provision also, like certain restrictions on willing away the property that can help mitigate sun preference, is not known whether provisions such as these they will be retained in the Uniform Civil Code that will come to be or not. So Uniform Civil Code it can be, but a mirage resulting from the spectacle created by the ruling dispensation, as the Goa family laws amply illustrates. So challenge to Jammu and Kashmir changes. So the legal challenge to the changes in Article 370 and removal of Jammu and Kashmir special status, it comes before the Supreme Court today. So issues includes, can the president substitute for an elected state government? Can parliament represent the political aspiration of the people of a state or not? So this is going to be heard by the Supreme Court. So talking about the constitutional changes to Article 370, these are factual things. Parliament, whether parliament is equal to state government or not, downgrading to union territory, Jammu and Kashmir constitution, what did it talk about, and colorable legislation. So the challenge is also based on the argument that constitutional changes, they are colorable legislation and thus legally untenable. So doctrine of colorable legislation is the legal principle that says what cannot be done directly cannot be done indirectly also. So this doctrine has been reiterated by the Supreme Court as well as the constitutional courts in other countries as well. So you can go through the factual things on your own. So China's view on SEO summit and Iran welcome need to save the group from India. So while the membership of the SEO, it is growing with Iran, it being the newest entrant. And the debate is also heating up over India's role in the China dominated grouping. So in 2017, we became a full-time member of SEO along with Pakistan. So foreign policy analysts in China, they have welcomed Iran's entry, saying it can prevent India from completely destroying the SEO. So accused India of spreading disharmony within the SEO also. This is what China believes in or what China feels. So commenting on the troublemaker role of India at the SEO Virtual Summit in New Delhi, Chinese scholar wrote in an article in the popular Chinese language digital news platform says that many scholars, including himself and former ambassadors and diplomats, have opposed India's entry into the SEO, but the government in Beijing made the decision. So they believe that India has used the SEO platform to challenge and in fact embarrass China. So basically different nuances are being talked about. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us in this analysis session. And I hope the topics and the things that we raised up today are clear to you. And also do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't and hit the like button for this video.